At Fort Yuma's scorching gates, a British lord publicly called his own daughter a bloated disgrace and handed her to an Apache war chief like livestock settling a debt. Lady Rosalind Fairburn, ridiculed for her size, unwanted by her blood, expected to die in the desert. Instead, the silent warrior who took her hand led her not to a grave, but to a hidden valley where every rule she'd ever known shattered. Her father meant it as punishment. But in the arms of the man she was taught to fear, Rosalind would discover the most dangerous truth of all: freedom. If you stay with me until the end of this journey, comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Rosalind's story can travel across the world. The sun over Fort Yuma didn't rise. It attacked. By mid-morning, the heat shimmered off the parade ground in waves thick enough to choke on, and the dust clung to every surface like a living thing. Rosalind Fairburn stood in the center of that merciless square, her heavy traveling dress soaked through with sweat, her corset cutting into flesh that her father had spent 26 years teaching her to hate. She kept her eyes fixed on the flagpole, not on the soldiers watching from the barrack steps, not on the Apache delegation standing silent and unreadable near the quartermaster's office, and certainly not on her father. Lord Cedric Fairburn's voice carried across the fort with the precise, clipped authority of a man who'd spent his life giving orders and expecting them obeyed. "I trust this settles the matter of the northern boundary, Chief Talako. My daughter for your forbearance on the surveying dispute, a more than generous exchange given her limited prospects." Rosalind's nails bit into her palms. Limited prospects, as if she were a mare gone lame, a piece of property whose value had depreciated beyond repair. "She eats enough for 3, her father continued, his tone conversational, almost jovial, as if discussing livestock at market. "Always has. Her mother despaired of it. I've despaired of it. Perhaps your people will find some use for her, though I confess I cannot imagine what." A ripple of laughter from the watching soldiers. Rosalind felt her face burn hotter than the sun could account for. She risked a glance at the man her father had just bartered her to. Chief Talako stood motionless, his face carved from the same stone as the mountains behind the fort. He was tall, taller than her father, taller than the fort commander, and the sun caught copper in his skin and blue-black in his long hair. He wore no war paint, no feathers, none of the savage trappings she'd been taught to expect. Just simple buckskin, worn soft with use, and a knife at his belt that looked like it had been there so long it was part of him. His eyes met hers for one brief moment. She expected contempt, disgust, the same look she'd endured her entire life. Instead, she saw nothing. Not cruelty, not kindness, just a deep, unreadable stillness that made her feel transparent, as if he could see straight through her expensive dress and expensive upbringing to the terrified girl beneath. "The arrangement is acceptable," Talako said. His English was flawless, unaccented, which somehow made it more unsettling. "But I will hear her agree to come." Lord Fairburn's jaw tightened. "She'll do as she's told. She's my daughter." "Then let her say so." The silence that followed pressed down on the parade ground like a physical weight. Rosalind could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could feel the stares of every man present boring into her back. Her father's face had gone the dangerous shade of red that meant his temper was slipping its leash. She knew what he wanted her to say, knew what would happen if she refused. "I agree," she whispered. Louder. Talako's voice was quiet, but it cut through the heat like water through sand. "So your father's men can hear." She lifted her chin, met her father's furious gaze, and felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been holding itself together through sheer force of will for more years than she could count. "I agree to go with Chief Talako," she said clearly, "to settle my father's debt." Lord Fairburn's lips thinned to a white line. "Then it's done. Commander, I trust you'll witness that all obligations have been met." The fort commander, a weathered man with sergeant's stripes older than Rosalind, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Witnessed, Lord Fairburn, though I'll remind you that the lady is still a British subject, and if she wishes to return, she won't." Her father adjusted his hat, already turning toward the officers' quarters. "She knows where she stands. Come, gentlemen, the heat is intolerable." And just like that, he walked away. No farewell. No backward glance. Just the sound of his boots on the packed earth fading into the afternoon shimmer. Rosalind stood frozen, her carefully packed trunk at her feet, her whole life reduced to 30 pounds of belongings and a father's casual cruelty. Around her, the fort was already returning to its routines. The soldiers drifted back to their posts. The commander disappeared into his office. Within minutes, it was as if the transaction had never happened. Only the Apache delegation remained. Teleko stepped forward, and Rosalind flinched despite herself. He stopped immediately, leaving a careful distance between them, and gestured to the two warriors behind him. They moved to her trunk without a word. "We have a day's walk," Teleko said. "2 if you need rest. Bring what you can carry on your person. The rest will follow." "Walk?" The word came out strangled. Rosalind looked down at her dress, her delicate button boots, her layers of petticoats. I'm not dressed for—" "Then change." He nodded toward the quartermaster's office. "The commander's wife keeps spare clothing for travelers. Tell her what you need." It wasn't a command, wasn't quite a suggestion, just a statement of fact, delivered in that same unsettlingly calm tone. Rosalind gathered her skirts and fled. The commander's wife was a practical woman with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes that had seen too much frontier hardship to judge anyone harshly. She took one look at Rosalind's corset-strangled figure and tight-laced boots and made a sound of pure exasperation. "Men," she muttered, pulling open a trunk that smelled of cedar and lavender. "Signing papers and settling scores, and not one thought for how a body's supposed to survive the doing of it." She pulled out a simple cotton dress, a split riding skirt, and a pair of worn leather boots. "Here. These belonged to a missionary woman who came through last spring, left them when she realized God wasn't calling her quite as loud as she'd thought." Rosalind's hands shook as she accepted the bundle. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." The woman's gaze was sharp, assessing. "You know where you're going?" "No?" The admission felt like another failure. "I don't know anything." "Then let me tell you what I do know." The woman glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. "Teleko's people have traded at this fort for 5 years. They keep their word. They've never broken a treaty, never stolen so much as a cartridge. The other tribes say he's hard but fair, and the Mexicans south of here say he's the only chief who will negotiate before he raids." She paused. "I won't lie to you, girl. It'll be hard, different, but I've seen what some white women endure in the name of respectability, and I'll tell you this, you could do worse than a man who asks if you agree before he takes you anywhere." Rosalind felt her throat close. She nodded, not trusting her voice. 10 minutes later, she emerged into the sun wearing clothes that actually fit her body instead of trying to reshape it into something more palatable. The cotton dress hung loose and comfortable. The boots were solid, broken in, made for walking instead of for show. She felt strange, exposed, almost indecent in her comfort. Teleko's expression didn't change when he saw her, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been approval. "Better," he said simply. Then he turned and started walking. Rosalind looked back at Fort Yuma one last time, at the walls that represented everything she knew about civilization, safety, order, at the flag hanging limp in the breathless heat. Then she followed the man her father had traded her to, out into the desert and into a future she couldn't begin to imagine. The first hour was hell. The heat pressed down like a living thing, and the sun hammered against Rosalind's head until she thought her skull might crack. Her new boots, for all their practicality, still needed breaking in, and she could feel blisters rising on her heels with every step. The Apache moved in silence, their feet finding purchase on rocks and sand with an ease that made Rosalind's stumbling progress look like a child learning to walk. Teleko led, setting a pace that wasn't fast but was absolutely steady, never slowing, never stopping. The two warriors who carried her trunk ranged behind, and an older woman with silver threading through her black braids kept pace at Rosalind's side, watching her with eyes that missed nothing. No one spoke. Rosalind tried to keep up. She truly did. But her body, used to the indoor life of a lady, betrayed her with every step. Her breath came hard. Her vision swam. The heat wrapped around her throat like a strangling hand. Water. She wasn't sure if she'd said it aloud or just thought it desperately, but suddenly Talako was there, pressing a leather canteen into her hands. She drank too fast, gasped, choked, and felt his hand steady her shoulder. "Slow," he said. "Small sips. The water must last." She nodded, unable to speak, and handed the canteen back. He took it, but his gaze lingered on her face, reading something there that she couldn't hide. "We stop," he said to the others. The older woman said something sharp in their language. Talako responded in the same tongue, his voice firm but not angry. The woman's expression remained skeptical, but she nodded. They found shade beneath a cluster of rocks that offered a pitiful respite from the sun. Rosalind sank down onto the sand and wanted to weep with relief. Her legs trembled. Her dress clung to her back. Every part of her felt heavy, useless, exactly as her father had always said. Talako crouched beside her, not close enough to crowd, but near enough to speak quietly. "How are your feet?" "Fine." The lie came automatically. He made a sound that might have been amusement. "Show me." "I said they're fine." "And I say show me." Still quiet, still calm, but there was steel underneath now. "If you cannot walk, I need to know." Rosalind felt her face burn. Slowly, humiliated, she removed her right boot. The sock beneath was spotted with blood. The blister on her heel had burst and bled and burst again. Talako studied it without expression, then spoke to the older woman. She produced a small leather pouch and handed it to him with obvious reluctance. He opened it, removed what looked like dried leaves, and began chewing them. Rosalind recoiled. "What are you—" "Be still." He pressed the chewed leaves against her heel, and she gasped at the sudden sting. But beneath the sting came something else, a coolness, a numbness that spread through the raw flesh like mercy. "Amahi says you should have told us sooner," Talako said, binding the poultice in place with a strip of soft cloth. "She says white women are too proud to ask for help until they're dying." "Is that your grandmother?" Rosalind asked, glancing at the older woman who was watching this exchange with barely concealed disapproval. "Yes, and she is not yet convinced you will survive." The blunt honesty should have stung worse than the poultice. Instead, Rosalind felt something in her chest loosen. At least he wasn't lying to her, wasn't pretending this would be easy. "Neither am I," she admitted quietly. Talako finished binding her foot and sat back on his heels. "Then we agree on something." He looked at her directly, and again she felt that strange transparency, as if her skin had gone glass and he could see every frightened, failing part of her. "Your father called you burden, dead weight, a disgrace to his name." Rosalind's throat closed. She nodded, unable to speak. "In my language," Talako said slowly, "we have a word, goshkan. It means something that looks weak but survives where stronger things cannot. The desert flower that blooms after fire. The reed that bends in the flood but does not break." He stood, offered her his hand. "You are not dead weight, Rosalind Fairburn. You are goshkan, and we will see what you can become." She stared at his outstretched hand, calloused, scarred, steady. She took it. They walked until sunset painted the desert in shades of copper and gold, then made camp in a shallow canyon where the rocks still held the day's heat. Rosalind collapsed onto the sand and watched through exhausted eyes as the Apache moved with practiced efficiency, building a small fire, laying out bedrolls, preparing a meal from supplies she hadn't noticed anyone carrying. Amahi brought her a bowl of something that looked like stew, but smelled unfamiliar. Rosalind took it with shaking hands, too tired to be polite, too hungry to care what it was. The first bite was revelation, meat and corn, and something slightly bitter that made her tongue tingle. She ate 3 bowls before pride caught up with her hunger, and by then, Amahi was almost smiling. "She says you eat well," Talako translated, settling onto his own bedroll near the fire. "This is good. It means you want to live." Did she think I didn't? Amahi has seen many white captives. Most refuse to eat. They think if they milk themselves weak enough, they will be sent back. He fed a stick into the fire, watched it catch and flare. "They do not understand. Once you cross into our land, there is no going back, only forward." Rosalind set down her empty bowl. Then I'm not a captive. No. He looked at her across the flames. You are something else. We don't have a word for what your father did, trading a daughter like a horse. In our way, this is wrong, shameful. In my world, too, Rosalind said quietly. He just didn't care. Silence settled between them, broken only by the snap of burning wood and the distant call of something that might have been a coyote. Above them, stars emerged in impossible numbers, so many and so bright that Rosalind felt dizzy looking up at them. What happens when we reach your home? She asked. Teleko was quiet for a long moment. That depends on you. You can live as a servant if you wish, do simple work, stay apart, or you can try to learn our ways, become part of the village. He paused. Both are hard. One is harder, but better. More. More what? More life. He said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. More purpose, more belonging, but also more failure, more learning, more times you will want to give up. He looked at her again with those unreadable eyes. Your father sent you to us as punishment. You can accept that and live small. Or you can make him a liar. Rosalind felt something stir in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. And if I fail? If I can't learn? Then you fail, Teleko shrugged. But failure while trying is not the same as never beginning. One is honorable, the other is just empty. She turned that over in her mind as the fire burned lower and the others settled into sleep around them. Somewhere in the distance, that coyote called again, and this time it was answered by another, then another, until the canyon rang with their wild song. Get some rest, Teleko said, lying back on his own bedroll. Tomorrow will be harder. Rosalind stretched out on the blanket Amahi had provided, feeling every screaming muscle, every blister, every sunburned inch of skin. She should have been miserable, should have been terrified. Instead, she found herself listening to the coyotes and thinking about desert flowers blooming after fire. The second day was worse. They broke camp before dawn, and Rosalind discovered that sleeping on hard ground did nothing to prepare a body for more walking. Her legs felt like wood. Her blisters, despite Teleko's medicine, screamed with every step. The sun rose behind them, and within an hour the heat was oppressive again. But something had shifted overnight. Teleko no longer led at a relentless pace. He stopped more frequently, though he never made a show of it, just paused to examine a plant or a track, giving Rosalind a chance to catch her breath. Amahi walked closer, occasionally pointing out landmarks and speaking slowly in a mixture of Apache and broken English. The two warriors, whose names Rosalind learned were Naichi and Goyakla, no longer watched her with suspicious eyes, just the neutral assessment of men judging whether new livestock would make it to market. She decided to take it as progress. They stopped for midday rest in the shade of a massive rock formation that looked like a crouching animal. While the others ate dried meat and something that looked like pressed fruit, Rosalind sat with her back against the sun-heated stone and closed her eyes, trying to gather strength for the afternoon ahead. You're thinking too much. Rosalind's eyes snapped open. Teleko stood above her, holding out a water skin and something wrapped in a broad leaf. How do you know what I'm thinking? She asked, accepting both. Your face shows everything. Right now it shows you counting every step you've taken and every step still ahead, adding them like debts. She unwrapped the leaf and found some kind of ground corn mixed with honey and seeds. Isn't that what you do? Count the distance? No, I walk until I arrive. He settled onto the ground beside her, not close, but closer than he'd been before. The distance doesn't change whether I think about it or not, so I don't waste the thinking. That seems very... Rosalind searched for a word. Zen. I don't know this word. It means calm, present, not worried about the future. Teleko considered this. We have a story. A man is being chased by a tiger. He runs to a cliff, sees a vine growing down. He climbs down the vine. Halfway down, he sees another tiger waiting at the bottom. Then he sees mice gnawing through the vine, and beside him, growing from a crack in the rock, he sees a wild strawberry. Teleko paused. What does the man do? Try to fight the tigers? Rosalind guessed. Call for help? He eats the strawberry. Teleko smiled, just a slight curve of his mouth that transformed his whole face. Because the vine might break or might not. The tigers might kill him or might not. But the strawberry is real and sweet and there in his hand, so he eats it. Rosalind stared at him. That's insane. Maybe, but he dies either way. At least he tasted something beautiful first. She looked down at the food in her lap, at the water skin sweating in the heat, at the massive blue sky stretching forever above them, at her own body, exhausted and aching but still moving, still breathing, still here despite her father's predictions. Is this the strawberry? She asked quietly. This is you, alive, resting in shade with food and water. Teleko stood, brushing dust from his leggings. If that's not a strawberry, I don't know what is. They reached the hidden valley on the third day, just as the sun was setting. Rosalind had been walking in a kind of trance, her mind disconnected from her screaming body, when Teleko stopped at the crest of a rise and simply said, "Home." She looked down into the valley and felt her breath catch. It wasn't what she'd expected. No teepees, no war camp, no collection of primitive shelters. Instead, she saw a village, small but established, clustered around a stream that cut through the valley floor. The structures were different from anything she knew, built low to the ground with frameworks of bent wood and woven grass, but they looked permanent, carefully placed, intentional. Smoke rose from cook fires. She could hear voices, laughter, the sound of children playing. It looked like a home. You see there? Teleko pointed to a structure set slightly apart from the others, larger and with what looked like a porch area. That is Amahi's home. You will stay with her, learn from her. She will teach you our language, our ways, what you can do, what you cannot. Rosalind's stomach clenched. And you? I am chief. I have responsibilities. He glanced at her, and something in his expression softened. But I will come. Make sure you are adjusting. As they descended into the valley, people emerged from their homes to watch. Rosalind felt the weight of their stares, heard the murmur of questions in a language she didn't understand. Children pointed, women whispered, men's faces remained carefully blank. Amahi led her directly to the larger dwelling Teleko had indicated. Inside it was dim and cool, the air smelling of sage and something sweet like cedar. Blankets were stacked in one corner. Clay pots lined one wall. A fire pit sat in the center, smoke rising through a hole in the roof. This is your place, Amahi said slowly in English. You sleep here. You work here. You learn here. She pointed to a blanket roll in the corner. That is yours. Keep it clean. Keep yourself clean. Apache people are not dirty savages, like white men say. The rebuke was mild but clear. Rosalind felt her face heat. I never thought. Yes, you did. Amahi's gaze was sharp. All white people do. But you will learn different, or you will not belong. She turned to the fire pit, began building a small flame with practiced efficiency. Tomorrow, work begins. Tonight, you rest. You are not dead yet, so maybe you are stronger than you look. It was the closest thing to a compliment Rosalind had received in years. That night, lying on her blanket roll while Amahi snored softly across the room, Rosalind stared up at the smoke hole and watched stars drift past. Her body ached, her feet throbbed, her sunburned skin felt tight and hot. But underneath all of it, beneath the pain and exhaustion and uncertainty, she felt something else. She felt possible. For 26 years, she'd been a problem to be solved, a disappointment to be hidden, a burden to be passed along to someone else's keeping. Her father had looked at her and seen only what she cost him, in embarrassment, in prospects, in pride. Teleko had looked at her and seen a desert flower, something that might bloom after fire. She didn't know yet if he was right. Didn't know if she could learn this life, this language, these impossible ways. Didn't know if she would wake up one morning and find herself broken by the trying. But lying there in the dark, listening to the night sounds of a village that didn't yet know her name, Rosalind Fairburn made a decision. If she was going to fail, she would fail while trying. She would fail honorably. And if somewhere in all that failing she found even one moment of blooming, one strawberry moment of being more than her father said she could be. Then maybe, just maybe, it would all be worth it. Outside, a coyote called to the rising moon. This time, Rosalind smiled to hear it. Morning came with Amahi's foot nudging Rosalind's shoulder and a stream of Apache words that needed no translation. Get up! Work begins. Stop wasting daylight. Rosalind's body screamed in protest as she pushed herself upright. Every muscle had stiffened overnight, and her blistered feet sent sharp protests up her legs. She'd slept in her dress, too exhausted to do anything else, and now it was wrinkled and damp with sweat. Amahi handed her a clay bowl filled with something that looked like porridge and tasted vaguely of corn and ash. Rosalind ate it without complaint, too hungry to care, and followed the older woman out into the morning. The valley was already alive with activity. Women moved between the cook fires and the stream, carrying water in large clay pots balanced on their heads or hips. Men worked on weapons, checked horses, prepared for what looked like a hunting party. Children ran between the dwellings, playing some kind of chasing game that involved a lot of shrieking and laughter. Everyone stopped to stare when Rosalind emerged. Amahi said something sharp in Apache, and the staring became slightly less obvious but no less thorough. Rosalind felt herself being assessed, judged, found wanting. She lifted her chin and met their eyes, one by one, until they looked away. Good, Amahi said, the first praise she'd offered. You do not hide. This is good. She gestured toward the stream. Come, I show you water. The next hour was a lesson in humility. Amahi demonstrated how to fill the large clay pot at the stream's edge, how to lift it, how to balance it against her hip for the walk back to the dwelling. She made it look effortless, her movements fluid and practiced. Then she handed the pot to Rosalind. Rosalind managed to fill it, managed to lift it, though the weight made her arms tremble, managed 3 steps before the pot slipped, crashed to the ground, and shattered into a dozen pieces. The sound seemed to echo across the entire valley. Silence fell. Then, from somewhere behind her, Rosalind heard laughter. Not cruel exactly, but not kind either. The laughter of people watching someone fail at something a child could do. Amahi's face could have been carved from stone. She looked at the broken shards, at Rosalind's shaking hands, at the water soaking into the dirt. Then she said something in Apache that made the laughter stop. You try again, she said to Rosalind. Different pot. Smaller pot. I'm sorry, Rosalind whispered. I didn't mean to. Sorry does not bring back pot. Sorry does not bring back water. Amahi's voice was stern, but not unkind. Try again. Fail different this time. The second pot was smaller, easier to manage. Rosalind made it halfway back to the dwelling before her arms gave out and she had to set it down. By the third trip, she could carry it all the way, though she moved at a pace that would have made a tortoise impatient. By the 5th trip, her arms felt like they were on fire and her back screamed with every step, but she made it without spilling a drop. Amahi inspected the full water pot with the same critical eye she'd used to judge a war strategy. Finally, she nodded. Better. Tomorrow you carry 2. Rosalind wanted to laugh or cry, or possibly both. Instead, she just nodded. The rest of the morning was equally brutal. Amahi showed her how to grind corn between 2 stones, a simple task that left Rosalind's hands blistered and bleeding within minutes. How to weave grass into baskets, except Rosalind's fingers, clumsy and untrained, produced nothing but tangles. How to prepare food, tend the fire, perform a dozen small tasks that seemed impossibly easy until you tried to do them yourself. By midday, Rosalind was ready to collapse. Her hands were cut and bruised, her back ached. Her dress was filthy with dirt and ash and sweat. She sank down in the shade of Amahi's dwelling and closed her eyes, fighting tears of pure frustration. You are very bad at this, a young voice said in careful English. Rosalind's eyes snapped open. A girl of perhaps 10 stood before her, hands on her hips, head cocked to one side in frank assessment. She wore a simple dress and had her hair in 2 long braids, and her eyes were bright with intelligence and mischief. Yes, Rosalind agreed, too tired to be defensive. I am. My name is Desba, the girl said. She pronounced it carefully, as if teaching a very slow student. It means goes to war. My mother wanted a son, but she got me instead, so she gave me a warrior's name." The girl didn't seem bothered by this. "What is your name?" "Rosalind." Desba frowned, trying out the unfamiliar syllables. "Rosalind. That is a very long name. What does it mean?" I don't know." Rosalind realized she'd never thought about it. "It's just a name. My mother chose it." "A name should mean something," Desba said firmly. "Otherwise it is just noise." She settled onto the ground beside Rosalind, clearly planning to stay. "Why did your father give you to Chief Talico?" The question, delivered with a child's blunt curiosity, hit harder than Rosalind expected. "Because I'm fat," she said, "and useless, and an embarrassment to him." Desba considered this gravely. "Are you fat?" "Yes." "Are you useless?" "Apparently." "Are you an embarrassment?" Rosalind looked down at her ruined hands, her filthy dress, the complete disaster of her morning's work. "Yes." Desba picked up a stick and began drawing patterns in the dirt. "My grandmother says white people think very strange things. She says they think the sky is a thing you can own, and that a woman's worth is in how small she can make herself, and that being quiet is the same as being wise." The girl looked up, her dark eyes serious. "These are all stupid things to think." Despite everything, Rosalind felt her lips twitch. "Your grandmother sounds very wise." "She is a Mahi. She is the wisest woman in 3 valleys." Desba said this with complete confidence. "And she says you might survive, which is good because I need someone to practice my English with. My father says English is important now, that we must know the white man's language to negotiate with him, but it is very hard and I have no one to talk to." She paused. "Will you help me with English if I help you not be so useless?" It was possibly the most practical offer Rosalind had received in her entire life. "Yes," she said, "I will help you." "Good." Desba stood, brushed dirt from her dress. "Come, I will show you the easy way to carry water. Grandmother's way is the strong way, but there is also the clever way, and you are not strong yet." Rosalind followed the girl back to the stream, where Desba demonstrated a technique involving 2 smaller pots balanced on a pole across the shoulders. It was easier, though it made Rosalind feel like a pack mule. But the pots stayed balanced, and the water made it back to Amahi's dwelling without spilling, and when Amahi saw what they'd done, her stern face almost smiled. "Clever," she said to Desba in English, "but she must learn strong way too, or she will always be weak." "Yes, grandmother," Desba said dutifully, "but first she must learn to survive. Then she can learn to be strong." Amahi grunted, which seemed to be her way of agreeing, and turned back to the meal she was preparing. Desba grinned at Rosalind. "See? I am very good at negotiating." The afternoon brought new disasters. Amahi decided Rosalind should learn to tend the cook fire, a task that seemed simple until you factored in the particular way the smoke should draw, the precise placement of wood, the careful management of heat for different types of cooking. Rosalind burned her fingers twice, filled the dwelling with smoke 3 times, and on the 4th attempt accidentally kicked over a pot of stew that had been simmering since morning. The look on Amahi's face could have curdled milk. "Outside," the older woman said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Go outside. Do not come back until I am less angry." Rosalind fled. She found herself at the edge of the village, where the dwellings gave way to open ground and the valley rose toward the encircling hills. She sank down onto a sun-warmed rock and finally let herself cry, great gulping sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for the broken pot and the burned fingers and the ruined stew, cried for her complete inability to do even the simplest task, cried for her father's voice in her head, telling her she was exactly as useless as he'd always known. "That bad, is it?" Rosalind's head snapped up. Talico stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable as always, but something in his posture suggested he'd been there for a while. "I destroyed Amahi's stew," Rosalind said, wiping furiously at her eyes. "She spent all morning making it, and I kicked it over like a complete fool." "Ah." Talico settled onto the rock beside her. "That stew was 3 days old. She's been looking for an excuse to throw it out." Rosalind stared at him. "What?" "Amahi hates waste, but that stew had turned. She would never admit it needed to be dumped, so she was just going to keep cooking it until someone else noticed. His mouth twitched. You did her a favor. She didn't look grateful. No, she looked like a woman whose student is learning to do things the Apache way, which is to fail as loudly as possible, so everyone can learn from your mistakes. Talaco stretched his legs out in front of him. How are your hands? Rosalind looked down at her blistered, cut, burned fingers. They hurt. Good. That means you're using them. He reached into a small pouch at his belt and pulled out the same dried leaves he'd used on her feet. May I? She nodded, and he took her hands in his. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he examined the damage, then began pressing the chewed leaves against the worst of the cuts. The sting made her gasp, but the relief that followed was immediate. Amahi told me you carried water, he said, focused on his work. 5 trips, more than most white women manage on their first day. I broke a pot. Yes, that happens. I broke 7 pots my first season learning pottery. He glanced up at her, a hint of humor in his dark eyes. I was 8 years old and very enthusiastic. Despite herself, Rosalind laughed. It came out watery and broken, but it was still a laugh. 7 pots? 7. My mother finally forbade me from going near the clay until I learned patience. He finished binding her right hand and moved to her left. You're trying very hard to be perfect, Rosalind Fairburn. This is your mistake. How is trying hard a mistake? Because perfection is impossible, so you set yourself up for failure. He tied off the bandage and released her hands. Our people have a different way. We say, be as you are, then be a little more tomorrow. Not much more. Just a little. But every day, a little more. He stood, brushed dust from his leggings. You carried 5 pots of water today. Tomorrow, maybe you carry 6. Or maybe 5 again, but faster. Or maybe 5 again, but without bleeding. He looked down at her. All of these are more than you were yesterday. All of these are enough. Rosalind felt something loosen in her chest. What if I never get good at any of this? Then you find what you can get good at. Talaco shrugged. Not everyone is good at carrying water or making baskets or cooking stew. Some are good at healing, some at teaching, some at making people laugh or making them think or making them feel less alone. He held out his hand to help her up. You've been here 1 day, and already Desba follows you around practicing English. Already Amahi is thinking about what you might become instead of what you cannot do. Already I am standing here talking to you instead of managing the hunting party I should be managing. His grip was warm and steady. Maybe you are better at this than you think. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Talaco? Yes? Thank you. He nodded once, then released her hand and started back toward the village. After a few steps, he paused and glanced back. And Rosalind? When you go back to Amahi, tell her you are sorry about the stew, but you think it might have been old. See what she says. Then he was gone, moving between the dwellings with that same fluid grace that made walking look like an art form. Rosalind stood there for a long moment, looking down at her bandaged hands, then started back toward Amahi's dwelling. Her stomach felt like it was full of butterflies, but she squared her shoulders and walked inside. Amahi was scrubbing out the pot, her movements sharp with irritation. Grandmother, Rosalind said carefully, using the term Desba had used, I am very sorry about the stew. But was it possible it had gone bad? It smelled a little strange when I knocked it over. Amahi's hand stilled. She turned slowly, her face unreadable. Then, to Rosalind's complete shock, she laughed, a short, sharp bark of amusement. That Talaco, she said, shaking her head, always too clever. She set down the pot and fixed Rosalind with a stern look. Yes, stew was old. I should have thrown it out yesterday, but I am stubborn old woman who does not like waste. You did me favor, even if you did not know it. She paused. But do not kick over my pots again, or I will make you catch your own dinner with your bare hands. Yes, grandmother. And do not call me grandmother unless you mean it. That is a name you earn, not a politeness you borrow. Rosalind felt her face heat. I'm sorry, I didn't mean... I know what you meant. Amahi waved a hand dismissively. But words have power. Use them with care. She returned to her scrubbing. Now go help Desba with the evening meal. She is supposed to be plucking birds, but probably she is playing instead. Tell her if the birds are not plucked by sunset, she will eat feathers for dinner. Rosalind escaped before she could cause any more damage. She found Desba by the stream, and the girl was indeed playing rather than plucking. She'd lined up 4 dead quail on a flat rock and appeared to be having them conduct a very serious conversation with each other. "Grandmother says you'll eat feathers if those birds aren't ready by sunset," Rosalind said. Desba sighed dramatically. "I know, but plucking is so boring, and these birds died very bravely, so I thought they should have a proper council first." She picked up one of the quail. "Here, I will teach you to pluck, and you will teach me more English words. What is the English word for when the sun makes the sky turn red?" "Sunset." "No, the special word, when it is very beautiful." "Oh, dusk, maybe? Or twilight?" "Twilight." Desba tested the word. "That is pretty, like the light is 2 things at once." She demonstrated the plucking technique, quick, firm pulls that stripped feathers cleanly without tearing the skin. "Now you try." Rosalind tried. The feathers came away in messy clumps, and she accidentally tore the skin twice, but by the 3rd bird she was getting the hang of it. Desba kept up a steady stream of questions about English words, about white people's customs, about whether Rosalind had ever seen the ocean, and Rosalind found herself relaxing into the rhythm of work and conversation. "Why did Chief Talico take you?" Desba asked suddenly. "He could have asked for horses or guns or land. Why did he want a white woman who cannot carry water?" Rosalind's hands stilled. "I don't know. My father offered me to settle a dispute. I thought Talico was just taking what was offered." "No." Desba shook her head firmly. "Chief Talico never takes anything unless he has a reason. He is very careful about what he brings into our village. Everything must have purpose, must be useful." She studied Rosalind with those 2 sharp eyes. "So he must see something in you, something useful." "I haven't been very useful so far." "Not yet," Desba agreed cheerfully. "But grandmother says you have survivor eyes. She says most white women who come here have already given up inside. But you still fight. Even when you are crying and your hands are bleeding, you still fight." The girl plucked the last feather from her bird with a satisfied flourish. "This is good. Dead people are no use to anyone." It was possibly the most morbid encouragement Rosalind had ever received, but it warmed her nonetheless. They carried the plucked birds back to Amahi, who inspected them with her usual critical eye, then nodded approval. "Good. Better than I expected. Now, Rosalind, you will help me prepare the evening meal. Watch closely. I will not show you twice." The next hour was a lesson in Apache cooking. Amahi showed her how to prepare the birds, gutting them with quick, efficient movements, rubbing them with herbs Rosalind didn't recognize, wrapping them in broadleaves and burying them in the coals of the fire. How to make a corn dish that was somewhere between bread and porridge. How to brew a tea from roots that Amahi claimed would help with Rosalind's sore muscles. Rosalind tried to absorb it all, knowing she'd forget half by morning, but determined to remember what she could. As the sun began to set, other women arrived, some bringing their own dishes to add to the meal, others coming to help with the preparation. They spoke in Apache, their conversation flowing around Rosalind like water around a stone. She caught a few words here and there, recognized her own name, heard them discussing her with the frank assessment of people evaluating livestock. One woman, younger than Amahi but older than Rosalind, addressed her directly in halting English. "You, white woman. You know healing plants? White medicine?" Rosalind shook her head. "No, I'm sorry. I don't know anything about medicine." The woman looked disappointed. "We thought maybe white woman know white medicine. Help when our medicine not work." She shrugged. "If you learn, you tell Amahi. We have use for healer." It was the first time anyone had suggested Rosalind might have something to offer. "I'll learn," Rosalind said impulsively. "If someone will teach me, I'll learn." Amahi glanced up from the fire, her expression thoughtful. "This is good. Healing is needed, but learning is long, and you are still very stupid." She said it matter-of-factly, without malice. "First you learn language, then you learn plants, then maybe you learn healing, everything in order, or you kill patient." "I understand." "Do you?" Amahi fixed her with that penetrating stare. "Learning our ways means becoming one of us. Not white woman playing Apache. One of us. It means your old life is gone. Your old name is gone. Everything you were before is gone. Can you do this?" Rosalind thought about her old life, about parlors and corsets and afternoon teas where women smiled with their mouths while their eyes evaluated your every flaw, about her father's house, where she was tolerated at best, despised at worst, about the future she'd been facing, a lifetime of being an obligation, a burden, a disappointment. "Yes," she said, "I can do this." Amahi held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We will see. Words are easy. Living is hard." That night, after the meal was finished and the dishes cleaned and the fire banked for the night, Rosalind lay on her blanket roll and listened to the sounds of the village settling into sleep. Her body ached in new and creative ways. Her hands throbbed despite Talako's medicine. She smelled of smoke and grease and sweat. But she'd carried water today. 5 full pots plus several more using Desba's clever method. She'd learned to pluck birds and prepare a meal and brew healing tea. She'd made a friend in Desba and earned something that might have been respect from Amahi. She'd survived her first full day in a place that should have felt like exile, but instead felt like possibility. Through the smoke hole, she could see stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance. Somewhere out there, her father was probably sleeping in his comfortable bed, convinced he'd rid himself of an embarrassment. He thought he'd punished her, thought he'd send her somewhere she'd break and fade and eventually disappear. But lying there in the dark, hands aching and spirit stirring, Rosalind thought about desert flowers blooming after fire, about strawberries growing wild on cliff faces where tigers prowled below, about being a little more tomorrow than you were today. Her father had tried to make her nothing. She was going to make him a liar. Outside, the night wind sang through the valley, carrying the scent of sage and possibility, and Rosalind closed her eyes and let herself imagine what more might feel like. The days blurred into weeks, each one marked by small victories and humbling defeats. Rosalind's hands grew calloused, her muscles hardened, and her skin bronzed under the relentless sun. She learned to carry water without thinking about it, to start a fire that drew smoke properly, to pluck birds and gut fish and grind corn until her arms ached. Desba remained her constant companion and unofficial teacher, translating words and customs with the blunt honesty only a child could deliver. Amahi watched everything with those sharp eyes, correcting when needed, praising rarely but meaningfully. And Talako appeared at odd moments, checking her progress with healing plants, bringing her better boots when he noticed her limping, sitting by the fire some evenings to teach her words in Apache that Desba didn't know. He never stayed long, always had duties pulling him elsewhere, but his presence left an impression like footprints in sand. By the time the leaves began to turn and the air carried the first hint of autumn, Rosalind could hold simple conversations in Apache, could identify 20 different healing plants, and could work alongside the other women without causing disasters. She wasn't good yet, but she was better. A little more each day, just as Talako had said. Then one morning, everything changed. Rosalind woke to the sound of raised voices outside Amahi's dwelling. She pulled on her dress, soft buckskin now, traded from one of the village women, and emerged to find the entire village gathered in the central area. Men stood in tight groups, hands on weapons. Women clutched children close. And in the center of it all, Talako stood facing 3 scouts who'd just ridden in, their horses lathered with sweat. The scouts were speaking rapidly in Apache, their words tumbling over each other. Rosalind caught fragments, soldiers, coming, English lord, many guns. Her blood ran cold. "What's happening?" she asked Desba, who'd appeared at her elbow. "Scouts say soldiers are coming up the valley. Maybe 20 men, maybe more." Desba's face was pale. "And there's a white man with them. A lord. They're asking for you." Rosalind's legs went weak. Her father. Of course it was her father. 3 months of silence, and now he came with guns and soldiers, and God knew what story he'd told to justify it. Talako's voice cut through the rising panic, speaking in Apache with the calm authority of a man who'd faced worse than this. The villagers quieted, listening. He gave orders. Rosalind caught enough to understand he was organizing defenses, positioning scouts, preparing for confrontation, but hoping for negotiation. Then his eyes found hers across the crowd, and he gestured her forward. She moved through the gathered people on unsteady legs. Up close, she could see the tension in Talako's jaw, the calculation behind his calm expression. This was a man preparing for war while praying for peace. "Your father comes," he said quietly in English, "with American soldiers and demands." "I know." Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. "What will you do?" "That depends on what he wants, and on what you want." Talako studied her face. "This conflict is not between my people and the soldiers. It is between me and him, and between you and him. The question is whether you will let him decide your fate again, or whether you will decide it yourself." Amahi appeared beside them, her lined face grave. She said something sharp in Apache. Talako nodded. "Amahi says to prepare yourself. Your father will say cruel things to make you doubt. He will use the soldiers to frighten you. He will promise safety if you return and punishment if you stay." He touched her shoulder briefly. "But remember, you are not the woman he left here. You are stronger now. You belong to yourself." "Do I belong here?" The question escaped before Rosalind could stop it. "Truly?" Talako's expression softened. "Where else would you belong? You carry our water, you speak our language, you sleep under our sky and eat our food and heal our sick. Your hands are marked by our work. Your skin is darkened by our sun." He paused. "If you are not one of us, then what are you?" Before Rosalind could answer, a shout went up from the scouts positioned at the valley's entrance. The soldiers were here. The next hour felt like walking through a nightmare in slow motion. The village formed a reception party of sorts. Talako at the front with his senior warriors, the women and children behind, Rosalind standing beside Amahi in a position that was neither hidden nor prominent. Just another member of the community, watching strangers arrive. The soldiers came first, riding in formation with rifles held ready, but not aimed. Their lieutenant was young, maybe 30, with honest eyes and a nervous expression that suggested this wasn't the kind of duty he'd signed up for. Behind the soldiers rode her father. Lord Cedric Fairburn looked exactly as Rosalind remembered, tall, imperious, dressed in expensive traveling clothes that were somehow still immaculate despite the desert journey. His face was set in lines of righteous anger, and when his eyes found Rosalind in the crowd, something like triumph flashed across his features. "There," he said to the lieutenant, pointing. "My daughter, being held captive by these savages exactly as I said." The lieutenant dismounted slowly, his gaze sweeping the village with the assessment of a military man. He saw the orderly dwellings, the cook fires, the children peeking out from behind their mothers. He saw Rosalind standing freely among the Apache women, dressed as they were, marked by work and sun, but not by restraints or fear. "Lord Fairburn," the lieutenant said carefully, "your daughter doesn't appear to be restrained." "Of course not. They're too clever for that." Her father's voice dripped contempt. "They've brainwashed her, turned her against her own people. Look at her, dressed like a squaw, living like an animal. This is what I've been trying to prevent." Talako stepped forward, and the soldiers' rifles came up immediately. He stopped, raised his empty hands, and spoke in perfect English. "Lieutenant, I am Talako, chief of this village. We have no quarrel with the United States Army. This woman came to us freely, as settlement of a debt her father owed. She has lived among us for 3 moons. She has not been harmed, has not been held against her will. If she wishes to leave, she may leave. If she wishes to stay, she may stay. This is our way." "She wishes to leave," Lord Fairburn snapped. "I'm her father. I speak for her." "No." Talako's voice remained calm, but there was iron underneath. "She speaks for herself. This is the American way, is it not? Freedom of choice?" The lieutenant looked uncomfortable. "Lord Fairburn, perhaps we should hear from Miss Fairburn directly." "Lady Fairburn," her father corrected automatically. "And she's clearly been coerced. Look at her, man. She's been living among savages for months. God knows what they've done to her, what threats they've made." "Then let her tell us." The lieutenant turned to Rosalind. "Ma'am, are you being held here against your will?" Every eye in the valley fixed on Rosalind. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders, felt her father's expectation of submission, the soldier's skepticism, the villager's uncertainty. Felt Teleco's steady presence and Amahi's fierce hope, and Desba's small hand suddenly gripping her own. She stepped forward, and her voice when it came was stronger than she'd expected. "I am not being held captive, Lieutenant. I came here because my father traded me to Chief Telako to settle a land dispute. He called me a disgrace and an embarrassment, and he was glad to be rid of me." She met her father's eyes. "Those were your words, father. A bloated disgrace, dead weight. Remember?" Lord Fairbairn's face darkened. "I was angry. I spoke harshly, but I've come to make amends, to bring you home where you belong." "I am home." The words came out with absolute certainty. "This is where I belong." "You belong in England with your own kind, living a civilized life." Her father's voice rose. "Not grubbing in the dirt with savages, throwing away every advantage you were born to." "The advantages I was born to?" Rosalind felt something hot and terrible unfurling in her chest. "You mean the advantage of being told I was worthless every day of my life? The advantage of being hidden away because my body embarrassed you? The advantage of knowing my own father would rather I didn't exist?" She took another step forward. "I've been here 3 months, and in that time I've learned more about my own worth than I learned in 26 years in your house. These people you call savages taught me to be useful, to be strong, to be seen as something other than a disappointment." "This is madness," Lord Fairbairn turned to the lieutenant. "You see, she's been corrupted, turned against her own people. I demand you remove her from this place immediately, by force if necessary." The lieutenant's expression had shifted from uncomfortable to something harder. "Lord Fairbairn, I can't remove a woman by force when she's stating clearly that she wants to stay. That's not rescue. That's kidnapping. She doesn't know what she wants. She's been influenced, manipulated. I know exactly what I want." Rosalind's voice cut through her father's protests. "I want to stay here with these people, with—" She glanced at Teleko, felt her courage falter for just a moment, then pushed forward anyway. "With the man who saw worth in me when my own father saw none." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Lord Fairbairn laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Worth? He saw an opportunity, you stupid girl, a chance to humiliate me, to gain leverage. You think he cares about you? You think any of them care about a fat English cow who can barely carry a pot of water?" "I can carry water just fine now," Rosalind said quietly, "and grind corn, and pluck birds, and identify healing plants, and speak enough Apache to pray with the village elders. I can do all of that because they taught me, because they believed I could learn, even when I didn't believe it myself." Teleko moved to stand beside her, not touching, but his presence was like a wall at her back. "Lieutenant, you have heard her speak freely. You have seen that she is not imprisoned, not mistreated. By what law do you have the right to remove her?" The lieutenant looked at Lord Fairbairn, then back to Rosalind, then at Teleko. His shoulders squared. "By no law that I know of, Chief Teleko. Lord Fairbairn, I'm sorry, but if your daughter wishes to remain here of her own free will, I have no authority to take her." "Then I'll take her myself." Lord Fairbairn dismounted in one smooth motion, striding toward Rosalind with his hand outstretched. "Come along, Rosalind. Enough of this nonsense." "No. I am your father. You will obey me." "You stopped being my father the day you traded me like a horse." Rosalind stood her ground. "You gave up all rights to command me, all rights to claim me. I am not yours anymore." Something ugly twisted in her father's face. "You ungrateful little—" He lunged forward, grabbing for her arm. And Teleko was there, moving faster than seemed possible, his hand catching Lord Fairbairn's wrist in a grip that made the older man grunt with pain. "Do not touch her," Teleko said, his voice deadly quiet. "She has said no. You will honor that, or you will answer to me." "Get your hands off me, you savage!" Lord Fairbairn tried to wrench free, but Teleko's grip was iron. "Lieutenant, are you going to let this barbarian assault a British lord?" The lieutenant's hand had moved to his pistol, but he hadn't drawn it. His eyes were on Teleko's face, reading something there. "Chief Teleko, please release Lord Fairbairn." Teleko released him immediately, stepping back with his hands raised again. But he remained between Rosalind and her father, a living barrier. Lord Fairburn rubbed his wrist, his face mottled red with rage and humiliation. This is an outrage, an absolute outrage. I came here in good faith to rescue my daughter, and I'm assaulted by a savage and defied by the very girl I'm trying to save. Father, Rosalind found her voice again, and it was steadier now, clearer. I don't need saving. I needed this. Needed to learn that I was more than what you told me I was. Needed to find a place where my worth wasn't measured by my waistline or my marriageability or how much embarrassment I caused you at society dinners. She paused. You gave me to Talako because you wanted to be rid of me. Well, you succeeded. I'm gone. I'm not coming back. Please, just let me be gone. Never. The word came out like a curse. I won't let you throw your life away on some romantic delusion about noble savages and finding yourself. You're coming home, even if I have to. His hand went to his coat, and suddenly everything was moving too fast. Talako shouted something in Apache. The warriors surged forward. The soldiers raised their rifles. And Lord Fairburn pulled a small pistol from his inner pocket, the barrel swinging toward Talako with deadly intent. Rosalind screamed. The gunshot was impossibly loud in the confined space of the valley, echoing off the rocks and drowning out every other sound. She saw Talako jerk backward, saw blood, saw the world tilting sideways as her knees gave out. But then she realized Talako was still standing, still whole, and behind him, one of his warriors, a young man named Cochise, who'd taught her to fish, was falling, clutching his shoulder where blood seeped between his fingers. The bullet had gone wide, or someone had pushed Talako aside. Either way, Cochise had taken the shot meant for their chief. Chaos exploded across the valley. Apache warriors rushed forward with weapons drawn. Soldiers shouted and aimed rifles. The lieutenant was bellowing orders, trying to restore control, while Lord Fairburn stood frozen with the smoking pistol still in his hand, his face gone white as he realized what he'd done. Stand down! The lieutenant's voice cut through the mayhem. Everyone stand down! Lord Fairburn, drop the weapon, now! For a long moment, everything hung on a knife's edge. Rosalind could see warriors ready to charge, soldiers ready to fire, her father standing like a fool with a gun in his hand, and the consequences of his actions finally dawning in his eyes. Then Talako spoke, and though his voice was quiet, it carried absolute authority. Stop! The Apache warriors froze. Their weapons remained drawn, but they didn't advance. Talako turned slowly to face the lieutenant, and when he spoke, his English was precise and cold. You saw. Your soldiers saw. Lord Fairburn drew a weapon. Lord Fairburn fired first. By your own law, this is an act of aggression, an act of war. The lieutenant's jaw worked. Chief Talako, He fired on me while I was unarmed, speaking in peace, on my own land. Talako's gaze never left the lieutenant's face. If I give the word, my warriors will kill every soldier in this valley, and they will be justified by every law, yours and mine. The only question is whether you will give me a reason not to. The silence was absolute. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Then Amahi pushed forward, moving through the crowd with the privilege of age and wisdom. She went directly to Cochise, who'd sunk to his knees, his face pale with shock and pain. She knelt beside him, examining the wound with practiced hands, then barked orders that sent women running for supplies. Rosalind moved without thinking, dropping to Cochise's other side. She'd spent weeks learning healing herbs from Amahi, learning to clean wounds and prepare poultices. Her hands shook, but they moved with purpose, tearing cloth for bandages, pressing against the wound to slow the bleeding while Amahi prepared medicine. Lieutenant, Talako said, still in that terrible, quiet voice, you will arrest Lord Fairburn for assault and attempted murder. You will take him from this valley, and you will never return with soldiers unless you come to negotiate peace, not to threaten my people. The lieutenant looked at Lord Fairburn, who stood frozen in shock. Then he looked at Cochise, bleeding on the ground, at Rosalind working frantically to save him, at the Apache warriors ready to fight and die. He looked at the odds and the law and the consequences of every possible choice. Sergeant, he said quietly, take Lord Fairburn into custody. What? No! Lord Fairburn's voice cracked. I am a British lord. You cannot arrest me. I have diplomatic immunity. You fired a weapon at a tribal chief during peace negotiations on tribal land. The lieutenant's voice was flat. You're lucky I'm arresting you instead of letting them handle it their way. Sergeant, now! Two soldiers moved forward, gently but firmly, removing the pistol from Lord Fairburn's numb fingers and taking him by the arms. He tried to pull away, tried to summon his old authority, but it crumbled like sand. Rosalind, he said, and for the first time his voice held something other than contempt. Fear, maybe, or regret. Rosalind, tell them. Tell them I was trying to protect you. Rosalind looked up from Cochise's wound, her hands red with his blood, and met her father's eyes. She saw him clearly now, not the towering authority figure of her childhood, but a small, frightened man who'd tried to solve his problems with violence and was finally facing consequences for it. You weren't trying to protect me, she said quietly. You were trying to control me. There's a difference. She turned back to Cochise, pressing the poultice. Amahi handed her against his shoulder, watching the older woman's skilled fingers bind it in place. The bullet had passed through cleanly, missing bone and major vessels. With care and time, he would heal. Behind her, she heard the sounds of the soldiers preparing to leave, heard her father's protests growing fainter as they led him away, heard the lieutenant giving final orders, promising to send a formal apology and explaining that Lord Fairburn would be held at the fort pending investigation. Then the sounds faded, and there was only the valley, the setting sun, and the people she'd chosen to call her own. Talako crouched beside her, his hand coming to rest gently on her shoulder. You did well. He will live because of you. Rosalind looked at her bloody hands and felt tears sliding down her face. My father tried to kill you. Yes. He would have, if Cochise hadn't, if the shot had been true, but it was not. Talako's grip tightened. And you saved the man who saved me. This is not nothing, Rosalind. She turned to look at him, this man who'd taken her in when her father threw her away, who'd taught her to see herself as something other than a burden, who stood between her and violence without hesitation. I was so afraid, she whispered, when I saw the gun, when I thought, I know. His other hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing away tears. I was afraid too. Not for myself, but for you, for what it would do to you if he had succeeded. Around them, the village was returning to normal. Women were helping Cochise to a dwelling where he could rest. Warriors were standing down, putting away weapons. Children were emerging from where they'd been hidden, seeking reassurance from their mothers. Life was resuming, because life always did, even after violence threatened to shatter it. But something had changed. Rosalind could feel it in the way the other women looked at her now, not as a white outsider or a chief's burden, but as someone who'd stayed when she could have left, who'd fought to remain when her own father tried to reclaim her, who'd bled alongside them to save one of their own. Amahi stood, brushed dirt from her dress, and fixed Rosalind with that penetrating stare. Then slowly, deliberately, she reached out and touched Rosalind's shoulder. You are Goshk An, she said in Apache, the thing that looks weak but survives, the thing that blooms after fire. She paused. You are one of us now, if you wish it. Rosalind felt more tears spill over. I wish it. More than anything, I wish it. Then it is done. Amahi glanced at Talako, something knowing in her ancient eyes. And now I think the chief will want to speak with you. Alone. I will tend to Cochise. She walked away with the matter-of-fact certainty of a woman who'd just decided something important and expected the universe to comply. Talako helped Rosalind to her feet, still holding her hand. He led her away from the central area, toward the edge of the village where the valley rose toward the darkening sky. They climbed in silence until they reached a flat outcropping that overlooked everything, the dwellings below, the stream winding through the valley, the mountains rising all around like protective walls. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that seemed to set the whole world on fire. Rosalind sank down onto the warm stone, and Talako settled beside her, close enough now that she could feel the heat of him.
When I saw the gun, Rosalind said finally, I thought I would die, not from the bullet, but from the thought of losing you. You barely know me, but Taliko's voice was gentle. I know enough. She turned to face him.
I know you took in a woman no one else wanted. I know you taught me to see strength where I'd only seen shame. I know you stood between me and violence twice now, and both times you could have walked away. She paused, gathering courage. And I know that when you look at me, I feel seen in a way I never have before. Not as a disappointment or a problem or a burden, but as someone who matters. Talako was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the sunset. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. 3 moons ago, your father offered you to me, and I took you not because I wanted to humiliate him, though I did. I took you because I saw something in your eyes that day, something that reminded me of myself when I was young and everyone expected me to fail. He glanced at her. I was small as a boy, weak. My father despaired of me ever becoming a warrior. He called me a disappointment, said I would never lead, that I should accept a life in the shadows. Rosalind stared at him, this tall, strong, confident man, and tried to imagine him as a disappointed child. But I had a grandmother, Talako continued, who told me the same thing Amahi told you, that I was Goshkaan, that what looked like weakness was actually a different kind of strength. He turned to face her fully. So when I saw you standing in that fort, surrounded by people who thought you were nothing, I saw myself. And I thought, maybe she can bloom too. Maybe she just needs someone to believe she can. You believed in me before I believed in myself. Yes, and now you've proven me right. He smiled, that rare transforming expression. You stayed when you could have left. You chose us when your own blood tried to reclaim you. You fought beside us, bled with us. You are Apache now, Rosalind Fairburn. In every way that matters, you are one of us. But am I... She hesitated, then forced the words out. Am I one of you? Or am I yours? The question hung in the air between them, fragile and brave. Talako's hand came up to cup her face, the same gesture he'd used before, but this time his eyes held something new, something that made Rosalind's heart hammer against her ribs. If you were mine, he said slowly, it would not be because your father gave you to me. It would not be because you owed me anything or had no other choice. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. It would be because you chose me, freely, knowing you could choose otherwise. It would be because when you look at me, you see what I see when I look at you, someone worth fighting for. I see that, Rosalind whispered. I've seen it from the beginning, even when I was too afraid to admit it. Then perhaps, Talako said, his face very close to hers now, you should tell me what you want, not what your father wants, not what duty demands, what Rosalind wants. She thought about all the times in her life when she'd been told what to want, what to be, who to become. Thought about corsets and propriety and making herself smaller so others could feel bigger. Thought about her father's voice telling her she was worthless and about the years she'd believed him. Then she thought about carrying water in the desert sun, about grinding corn until her hands bled, about learning a new language and a new way of being and a new understanding of what strength could mean, about the moment she'd seen a gun pointed at this man and felt her whole world contract to a single, desperate prayer. Please, not him. Anyone but him. I want you, she said, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff into open air. I want this life, these people, this place, and I want you, if you'll have me. Not because my father traded me, not because I'm grateful you saved me, but because you make me want to be more than I am. Because you see the Goshkan in me, and I see the same strength in you. For one terrible moment, Talako didn't move, didn't speak, and Rosalind thought she'd made a horrible mistake. Then he kissed her, and the whole desert sky seemed to hold its breath. It was nothing like the kisses she'd imagined in her sheltered life. No gentle pressing of lips, no careful politeness. It was fierce and hungry and real, his hand tangling in her hair while his other arm pulled her close, and she kissed him back with all the desperate want she'd been holding inside for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Talako rested his forehead against hers. You are mine, he said, "and I am yours. This is how it should be. Equal. Chosen. Free." Below them, the valley was settling into night, cook fires blooming like small stars in the gathering dark. Rosalind looked down at her home because it was hers now, truly, and felt the last piece of her father's judgment finally fall away. She was not a burden, not a disappointment, not a disgrace. She was Goshk An, the thing that looked weak but survived where stronger things could not. She was a woman who carried water and ground corn and saved lives with her own bleeding hands. She was Apache now, and she was loved, and she was exactly where she belonged. The coyotes began their evening song, and this time Rosalind threw her head back and laughed with pure joy, the sound echoing across the valley like a promise. Her father had meant it as punishment, trading her away like unwanted freight. Instead, he'd given her freedom, and she was never, ever going back. They stayed on that cliff until the stars emerged in full glory, talking in the way people do when they've finally admitted what they've been holding back for too long. Talako told her about his childhood, about proving himself to a father who never thought he'd amount to anything, about becoming chief at 25 when the previous leader fell in battle. Rosalind told him about her mother's death when she was 12, about how her father's disappointment had turned to open contempt as she grew, about the years of feeling invisible in rooms full of people. "I understand now why you took me," she said, lying back against the warm stone with her head on his shoulder. "You saw yourself in that fort." "I saw possibility." His fingers traced lazy patterns on her arm, and I thought, if she survives the desert, she might survive anything, might even survive becoming one of us. "Did you know? That first day, did you know I would stay?" Talako was quiet for a moment. "No, I hoped, but I've seen too many white captives who chose death over adaptation, who clung to their old lives until there was nothing left to cling to." He shifted to look at her. "You were different. You were angry, yes, scared, yes, but not broken. Amahi saw it too. She said you had warrior eyes, not the kind that fights with weapons, but the kind that fights to survive." I didn't feel like a warrior. Warriors rarely do. They just keep moving forward because stopping means dying. The conversation eventually turned to practicalities, because even declarations of love needed to be grounded in reality. Talako explained that if they were to be together properly, there would be ceremonies, rituals that would bind them in the eyes of his people. It wouldn't be like a white wedding, no church, no priest, no formal vows before God. Instead, it would be witnessed by the tribe, blessed by the elders, marked by the exchange of gifts and promises that mattered more than any written contract. "When?" Rosalind asked. "When can we do this?" "Winter." Talako's voice carried certainty. "After the harvest is complete and before the hard snows come. It's traditional to marry when the year turns toward darkness, so you enter the cold season with someone to keep you warm." He smiled. "Very practical, our traditions." "I like practical." Rosalind turned her face up to kiss him again, slower this time, savoring it. "Though I suspect there's romance hidden underneath all that practicality." "Perhaps." His arms tightened around her. "Or perhaps we're just very good at pretending we're not sentimental." When they finally descended back to the village, the night was deep and the fires had burned low. Most of the dwellings were dark, but light still glowed from Amahi's home. The old woman was waiting, as if she'd known exactly when they'd return. She took one look at their faces and made a satisfied sound. "Finally, I thought I would die of old age before you two stopped pretending." Rosalind felt her face heat. "Grandmother." "Don't grandmother me? You think I don't see?" Amahi gestured at them with her pipe. "You've been circling each other like wolves for weeks. Very tiresome to watch. I'm glad you've finally settled it." She took a long draw from her pipe and blew smoke toward the smoke hole. "Now we can get on with the important things, like teaching you to cook properly so you don't poison my grandson with your terrible stew." "I'm getting better at cooking," Rosalind protested. "Better than terrible is still not good." But Amahi's eyes were warm. "Go. Rest. Tomorrow we begin preparations. If you're to be wife to a chief, you must learn many things, important things, secret things." She waved them away. "Go, go. Old women need sleep, even if young lovers do not. Rosalind retreated to her corner of the dwelling, acutely aware that Talico had left for his own home, and that despite everything that had happened between them, she would sleep alone until the proper ceremonies were complete. It felt strange, this mixture of tradition and propriety among people she'd been taught to think of as savages. But lying there in the dark, listening to Amahi's soft snoring, she found comfort in it. They were taking this seriously, making it real, building something that would last beyond passion and into the dailiness of life. The next morning brought Cochise's recovery to the forefront of everyone's concern. Rosalind went to check on him with Amahi, carrying fresh poultices and clean bandages. The young warrior was awake, propped up on blankets, his face pale but determined. "I hear I am a hero," he said in halting English when he saw Rosalind, "that I took bullet for Chief." "You saved his life," Rosalind said, kneeling beside him to examine the wound. The bleeding had stopped, and though the flesh around it was angry and inflamed, there was no sign of the deadly infection that killed so many gunshot victims. "How does it feel?" "Like fire." But Cochise smiled. "Good fire. The fire that tells you you're alive." She cleaned the wound with water boiled with healing herbs, trying to be gentle but thorough. Amahi watched critically, occasionally correcting her technique or suggesting different plants. It was a teaching moment disguised as treatment, and Rosalind absorbed every detail. "You will be fine," Amahi pronounced when they'd finished. "The bullet passed clean, and the white woman did not kill you with her healing, which is good. Rest now. Eat meat. Drink the bitter tea even though it tastes like dirt. In 2 weeks, you will be strong again." 2 weeks? Cochise looked horrified. "But the hunting season will happen without you." Amahi's voice was firm. "You took a bullet. You rest. This is not negotiable." Over the following days, Rosalind fell into a new rhythm. Mornings were spent with Amahi, learning not just the physical tasks of village life, but the deeper knowledge. Which plants healed, which ailments, how to read weather signs, the stories and customs that bound the tribe together. Afternoons often found her with Desba, whose English was improving rapidly and who'd appointed herself Rosalind's guide to all things Apache. "You must learn to ride," Desba announced one afternoon. "A chief's wife who cannot ride is like a bird who cannot fly. Very sad and useless." "I can ride," Rosalind protested. "I learned as a child." "English riding." Desba's tone suggested this was somehow shameful. "With saddles and reins and sitting like you have a stick in your back. Apache riding is different. Come, I will show you." The horse Desba led her to was a paint mare, smaller than the thoroughbreds Rosalind had learned on, but with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. There was no saddle, just a woven blanket and a simple rope halter. "You sit here," Desba said, demonstrating with the ease of someone who'd been riding since before she could walk. "Grip with your knees, feel the horse's movement, become part of the animal. If you fight the horse, you fall. If you trust the horse, you fly." Rosalind's first attempts were humiliating. She slid off twice, fell off once, and spent most of the time clinging to the mare's mane while Desba tried not to laugh. But gradually, painfully, she began to understand what the girl meant about becoming part of the horse. It wasn't about control or forcing the animal to obey. It was about partnership, communication, trust. By the end of the week, she could ride at a walk without falling off. By the end of the second week, she managed a trot. By the third week, Desba declared her acceptable, which, coming from a 10-year-old Apache girl, was high praise indeed. Talico watched one of these riding lessons from a distance, and afterward he came to walk with Rosalind back to the village. "Desba says you're learning," he said. "She says you only fall off once per day now, instead of 5 times. "Progress," Rosalind said dryly. "At this rate, I'll be competent by next spring." "Competent is good." He took her hand, a gesture that was becoming natural between them. "But you don't have to be perfect at everything, you know. You don't have to prove yourself every day." "Don't I?" She looked at him. "I'm a white woman who's going to marry an Apache chief. Every eye is on me, judging whether I'm worthy, whether I belong. And what do you think?" "I think—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I think I'm tired of caring what everyone else thinks. I think I want to just be, without constantly measuring myself against some impossible standard. She squeezed his hand. But I also think I want to be good at this life, not just adequate. I want to be someone the tribe can respect, someone who pulls her weight, and then some. Talako stopped walking and pulled her to face him. You saved Cochise's life. You stood against your own father to stay with us. You work from sunrise to sunset, learning our ways without complaint. Rosalind, you don't have to earn respect. You've already earned it. Now you just have to accept it. His words settled into her chest like a warm stone, and she leaned into him, letting herself be held for a moment before they continued back to the village. The preparations for their winter ceremony began in earnest as autumn deepened. Amahi took charge with the fierce efficiency of a general planning a campaign. There were gifts to be prepared. Rosalind spent hours working on a shirt for Talako, carefully beading it in patterns Amahi taught her, each design carrying meaning she was only beginning to understand. There were foods to be gathered and preserved for the feast. There were songs to be learned, customs to be explained, 1,000 small details that Amahi insisted were essential. A ceremony is not just a party, the old woman said one evening as they worked by firelight. It is a promise made in front of witnesses. It is the joining of two families, two lives. Every detail matters because every detail says something about who you are and what you value. What if I make a mistake? Rosalind asked, examining her beadwork with a critical eye. What if I do something wrong during the ceremony? Then you make a mistake. Amahi shrugged. We are Apache. We understand that life is imperfect. What matters is intention, not execution. If your heart is true, the tribe will see that. If you are pretending, they will see that too. She leaned over to inspect Rosalind's work. Good. The pattern is clean. Your hands are learning what your heart already knows. The weather turned colder, bringing morning frosts that painted the valley in silver and breath that misted in the early light. The tribe began its winter preparations in earnest. Hunting parties brought back deer and elk. Women processed meat for drying and making pemmican. The granaries filled with corn and beans and squash. It was a time of plenty and hard work. Everyone focused on ensuring the tribe would survive the lean months ahead. Rosalind threw herself into the work, determined to contribute. She helped process deer hides, scraping and stretching the leather until her arms ached. She learned to make pemmican, pounding dried meat with fat and berries, until it became the dense, nutritious food that would sustain them through winter. She gathered the last of the season's plants for medicine, filling leather bags with roots and leaves and seeds that Amahi deemed essential. And through it all, she felt herself changing. Not just her body, though that had transformed from soft English lady to work-hardened frontier woman, but something deeper, a shift in how she moved through the world. She no longer flinched when people spoke rapidly in Apache around her. She no longer felt like an outsider looking in. She was part of the rhythm of the village, woven into its daily fabric as surely as the baskets she was learning to weave. One afternoon, she was working on those baskets with a group of women when a rider came into the valley. It was one of the scouts who ranged the territory, and his arrival brought everyone to attention. Scouts didn't return early unless there was news, usually bad news. Talako emerged from his dwelling and spoke with the scout in rapid Apache. Rosalind caught fragments: soldiers, fort, message, lord. Her blood went cold. When the scout finished his report, Talako stood silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he turned and found Rosalind in the crowd. His expression told her everything she needed to know. "What is it?" she asked, moving to his side. "What's happened?" "Your father has been released from custody at the fort." Talako's voice was carefully neutral. The lieutenant sent a message. "Lord Fairburn is being sent back east under armed escort. He'll board a ship in San Francisco within the month, returning to England." He paused. "The lieutenant also sent this." He handed her a sealed letter. Her hands shook as she broke the wax and unfolded the paper. The lieutenant's handwriting was neat and precise. He explained that Lord Fairburn had been held for 3 weeks, during which time the fort commander and several officers had conducted an investigation. Witnesses confirmed that Lord Fairburn had drawn and fired first, that Chief Talako and his people had been acting in self-defense. However, given Lord Fairburn's diplomatic status and the potential for international incident, It had been decided to release him on the condition that he immediately leave the territory and return to England. "He's going home," Rosalind said, her voice strange in her own ears. "He's leaving America." "Does this change anything for you?" Teleko asked quietly. She looked up at him, this man who'd become her whole world, and felt the question settle into her bones. Did it change anything? Her father was leaving, returning to a country and a life she'd left behind. This was her last chance to reconsider, to go back if she wanted to reclaim some version of her old existence. "No," she said, and the certainty in her voice surprised even her. "He could stay in the fort forever, or sail tomorrow. It doesn't matter. I'm not going back. I made my choice, and I'm keeping it." Something in Taleko's expression softened. "I had to ask." "I know." She folded the letter and tucked it into her dress. "And I'm glad you did. But Taleko, you need to understand something. When I stood in that valley and watched my father ride away, a part of me died. The part that still hoped he might see me, might value me, might love me the way a father should love a daughter." She took his hands. "That girl is gone. The woman I am now doesn't need his approval or his presence or his regret. I have everything I need right here." Around them, the village had returned to its work, giving them privacy in the way communities do when they understand something important is happening. Amahi watched from her dwelling, her weathered face approving. Desba grinned from where she was supposed to be hauling water. The other women exchanged glances that suggested they'd been waiting for this moment, testing whether the white woman's resolve would hold. "Then we continue with the preparations," Teleko said, "and when winter comes, we will stand before the tribe and make our promises. No father to give you away, no English customs, no one's permission needed but our own." "Perfect," Rosalind said, and kissed him right there in front of everyone. Propriety be damned. The scandal lasted approximately 10 seconds before the entire village erupted in laughter and teasing. Even Amahi was smiling around her pipe. The days shortened and the nights grew colder, but the village buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with weather. The approaching ceremony wasn't just about Taleko and Rosalind. It was a celebration of the tribe's survival, of another successful harvest, of bonds that held strong even when tested. Everyone had a role to play, and everyone threw themselves into preparation with enthusiasm. Rosalind finished the beaded shirt and started on a pair of moccasins, trying to match the intricate patterns she'd seen on Taleko's everyday footwear. Her first attempt was laughably bad, lumpy, and uneven. Amahi looked at it, shook her head, and made her start over. "You are marrying a chief," the old woman said. "Your gifts must reflect your respect for him and for the tribe. This," she held up the lumpy moccasin, "this reflects nothing but laziness." "It's not laziness," Rosalind protested. "It's lack of skill." "Then gain skill. You have time, you have teachers, you have no excuse." Amahi tossed the failed moccasin back to her. "Again, better this time." The second attempt was marginally better. The third was actually passable. By the fifth pair, because Amahi made her practice on scrap leather first, Rosalind had created something she was genuinely proud of. The beadwork was clean, the stitching tight, the leather soft and supple from proper treatment. Amahi examined them with her critical eye, turning them this way and that in the firelight. Finally, she nodded. "Acceptable. Not beautiful, but honest. He will know you worked hard to make them." "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me," Rosalind said. "Don't let it go to your head." But Amahi was almost smiling. "Now the feast. We must discuss the feast." The feast preparations were elaborate and involved seemingly every woman in the village. Deer meat would be roasted, corn made into a dozen different dishes, special breads baked in the coals, berries preserved since summer brought out to make sweet dishes. There would be dancing, singing, storytelling late into the night. It was a level of celebration that made Rosalind's heart race with nervousness. "What if they don't like the food I helped prepare?" she asked Desba one afternoon as they ground corn together. "Then they will tell you it's terrible and eat it anyway because they're hungry," Desba said matter-of-factly. "Apache people are honest. If something is bad, we say so. But we also understand that trying is more important than perfection." She paused in her grinding. "Besides, Grandmother is supervising everything.
She would die before she let bad food be served at her grandson's ceremony. That's oddly reassuring. I know. Desba grinned. Grandmother's pride is very useful sometimes. As the ceremony date approached, Rosalind found herself growing increasingly nervous. Not about marrying Talako, that felt as right as breathing, but about the ceremony itself, about standing before the entire tribe and speaking words in a language she was still learning, about becoming officially and irrevocably one of them. 3 nights before the ceremony, as she lay sleepless on her blanket, Amahi's voice came from across the dwelling. You are thinking too much again. I can hear your thoughts buzzing like angry bees. I'm nervous, Rosalind admitted. Good. Nervous means you care. Means you understand what you're doing is important. Amahi shifted on her own blanket. But nervous should not become fear. You want to marry my grandson? Yes. More than anything. You want to be Apache, truly, not just pretending, not just playing at a new life, but really becoming one of us? Yes. Then what is there to fear? You've already done the hard part, the choosing, the learning, the changing. The ceremony is just words and witnesses making official what is already true in your heart. Amahi paused. Though I will tell you a secret. When I married Talako's grandfather, I was so nervous I forgot my own words during the ceremony. Just stood there with my mouth open like a fish. Everyone laughed. We still tell the story at gatherings. Rosalind felt laughter bubble up despite her anxiety. What did you do? His grandfather leaned in and whispered my words back to me. I repeated them. We continued. 50 years of marriage, and no one cares that I forgot my words on the first day. Amahi's voice was warm in the darkness. The ceremony is one day. The marriage is a lifetime. Keep your eyes on what matters. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost thick on the ground and ice along the stream's edges. Winter was announcing its arrival, right on schedule. Rosalind woke to find Amahi already up, building the fire, muttering to herself about preparations. 2 more days, the old woman said when she saw Rosalind stirring. 2 more days, and you will be proper Apache wife. Then maybe you will stop making moon eyes at my grandson and actually focus on your work. I don't make moon eyes, Rosalind protested, though she was fairly certain she did. You absolutely make moon eyes, very distracting, very inappropriate. But Amahi was smiling. Now come. Today we prepare your ceremonial dress. This cannot be rushed. The ceremonial dress was unlike anything Rosalind had expected. It was made of soft doeskin, bleached almost white and decorated with intricate beadwork and fringe. But it wasn't a new dress. It had been worn by other women before her, passed down through generations. Amahi explained that wearing a dress with history honored those who came before and symbolized continuity, the endless cycle of women who'd stood where Rosalind would stand. My grandmother wore this, Amahi said, running her weathered fingers over the beadwork. Then my mother, then me. Then my daughter would have worn it, but she died before she could marry. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Rosalind heard the old grief underneath. Now you will wear it. You will carry their spirits with you, and someday if the spirits bless you with a daughter, she will wear it too. Rosalind touched the soft leather reverently. Grandmother, I don't know if I'm worthy of this. Worthy is not for you to decide. I am deciding, and I say you are worthy. Amahi held up the dress. Try it. We may need to adjust. The dress fit surprisingly well, just a little long in the sleeves. Amahi marked where to take it in, then carefully removed it and began the delicate work of alteration. As she stitched, she told stories about her own wedding, about her grandmother's wedding, about the customs and meanings behind every element of the ceremony. Rosalind listened and absorbed, committing it all to memory. Talako came by that evening, bringing fresh meat from a hunting party. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Rosalind sitting by the fire. The ceremonial dress spread across her lap while she helped Amahi with the final adjustments. You're not supposed to see that before the ceremony, he said, but his eyes were warm. Then stop looking, Amahi said tartly, and take your meat to the communal fire. We are busy with women's work. He retreated, but not before catching Rosalind's eye and smiling in a way that made her heart race. Moon eyes, Amahi muttered.
Both of you, hopeless. The night before the ceremony, Rosalind couldn't sleep at all. She lay on her blanket, staring up at the smoke hole, watching stars wheel slowly across the small circle of sky. Tomorrow, she would stand before the tribe. Tomorrow, she would speak words that would bind her to Tala'ako and to his people forever. Tomorrow, she would stop being Rosalind Fairburn and become something new. She wasn't afraid. Not exactly. But she felt balanced on a knife's edge between two lives, about to step fully into the new one and leave the old one behind forever. "Are you awake?" Desba's voice was a whisper from the doorway. "Yes, come in." The girl slipped inside and settled next to Rosalind's blanket. "I wanted to give you this before tomorrow, when everyone else is giving gifts and making speeches." She pressed something into Rosalind's hand, a small pouch woven from grass, decorated with simple but careful beadwork. "Desba, it's beautiful. Open it." Inside the pouch were 3 smooth stones, each no bigger than her thumbnail. They'd been polished until they gleamed in the faint firelight. "They're from the stream," Desba explained. "I've been collecting them since you came here. This one," she pointed to a white stone, "is from your first day, when you broke grandmother's pot. This one, a gray stone, is from the day you stood against your father. And this one, a stone that was almost translucent, shot through with veins of copper, is from today, to remember where you started and how far you've come." Rosalind felt tears sting her eyes. "Desba, this is the most thoughtful gift anyone's ever given me. Keep them close tomorrow. When you're nervous, hold them and remember, you've already done the hard things. Tomorrow is just words and ceremony. You've already proven everything that matters." The girl hugged her quickly, then disappeared back into the night, leaving Rosalind holding 3 small stones that suddenly felt like they contained the whole weight of her transformation. She clutched them in her palm and finally, fell asleep with a smile on her face. Tomorrow she would marry the man who saw her as Goshk An, the thing that looked weak but survived where stronger things could not. Tomorrow she would become Apache, officially and irrevocably. Tomorrow her new life would truly begin. But tonight she held 3 stones and remembered every step of the journey that had brought her here, and she was grateful for all of it, even the breaking, even the pain, even the father who'd thrown her away thinking it was punishment. Because all of it, every single piece, had led her home. Dawn came with frost painting the valley silver and Rosalind's breath misting in the cold air as she emerged from Amahi's dwelling. The village was already awake, smoke rising from cook fires, voices calling out in preparation for the day's celebration. Today was the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, when darkness held its greatest power before slowly surrendering back to light. It was the traditional day for binding ceremonies, for promises made in darkness that would carry into the returning sun. Amahi pushed a bowl of corn porridge into Rosalind's shaking hands. "Eat. You will need strength for what comes." "I'm too nervous to eat." "Eat anyway. Fainting during your own ceremony is bad luck." The old woman sat across from her, her face serious. "Today you will speak words that cannot be taken back. Today you will become one of us in the eyes of the tribe and the spirits. Are you ready?" Rosalind thought about the 3 stones in the pouch Desba had given her, now tucked safely in the pocket she'd sewn into her everyday dress. Thought about the journey from Fort Yuma to this moment, every stumble and triumph that had led her here. "Yes, I'm ready." "Good." Amahi stood, brushing ash from her dress. "Then we begin." The morning passed in a blur of preparation. Other women came to help Rosalind bathe in water heated over the fire, washing her hair with herbs that left it smelling of sage and cedar. They combed it out carefully, braiding it in the style of Apache women, weaving in small ornaments of bone and turquoise. Every gesture felt ritualistic, sacred, as if they were preparing her not just for a ceremony, but for a transformation. When they finally brought out the ceremonial dress, Rosalind's hands trembled as she slipped it over her head. The soft doeskin settled against her skin like a blessing, the weight of generations of women who'd worn it before her pressing gently on her shoulders. The beadwork caught the firelight, throwing tiny sparks of color across the dim interior of the dwelling. Amahi circled her slowly, adjusting the drape of the dress, tugging the fringe straight. "You look Apache," she said finally, and there was satisfaction in her voice. Not white woman playing dress-up, Apache. One of the younger women handed Rosalind a mirror, real glass, traded from some passing merchant, rare and precious out here. Rosalind looked at her reflection and barely recognized herself. Her skin was bronze from months in the sun, her face leaner, stronger. Her hair fell in dark braids decorated with turquoise and bone. The ceremonial dress transformed her into something she'd never imagined becoming, a woman who belonged to this place, this people, this life. "I don't look like myself," she whispered. "No," Amahi agreed. "You look like who you were meant to be. There is a difference." Outside, drums had begun to beat, a steady rhythm that seemed to match Rosalind's racing heart. The ceremony would begin at sunset, when the light balanced perfectly between day and night. But the celebration had already started. She could hear singing, laughter, the sounds of a community gathering to witness something important. Desba burst into the dwelling, her eyes wide. "Everyone is here. People came from 2 other villages to see Chief Talico marry the white woman who stood against her own father." She grabbed Rosalind's hands. "Are you scared?" "Terrified." "Good. That means you're not stupid." Desba squeezed her hands. "But you don't have to be scared alone. We're all with you. The whole tribe is with you. And Talico—" She grinned. "Talico has been pacing since dawn like a caged wolf. Naiche says he's never seen the chief so nervous." The image of Talico pacing and nervous made Rosalind smile despite her fear. "Really? Really? He keeps checking the sun, asking if it's time yet, driving everyone crazy." Desba leaned in conspiratorially. "I think he's more scared than you are. He's a chief. He's led war parties, negotiated with the army. How can he be scared of a ceremony?" "Because war you can control with weapons and strategy. Love," Desba shrugged with the wisdom of someone far older than 10. "Love you can only surrender to. That's much scarier." The sun crawled across the sky with agonizing slowness. Rosalind stayed in the dwelling, as was traditional, while outside the village transformed. She could hear the sounds of preparation, tables being set up, food being arranged, the communal fire growing larger. Periodically, women would come in to check on her, adjusting her dress, offering words of encouragement or advice, sharing stories of their own binding ceremonies. Cochise appeared mid-afternoon, his shoulder still bandaged but healing well. "I came to thank you," he said in careful English, "for saving my life, for standing with us against your father. You are brave, and I am honored to call you sister after today." "I did what anyone would do," Rosalind said. "No, you did what Apache would do. Big difference." He smiled. "Chief Talico chose well. The tribe is lucky to have you." As the sun began its final descent toward the horizon, Amihi returned with 3 elder women Rosalind had seen around the village, but never spoken to directly. They were the keepers of tradition, the ones who would bless the ceremony and witness the vows. The eldest, a woman so old her face was a map of wrinkles, spoke in Apache. Amihi translated. "She says the spirits are pleased, the signs are good, clear sky, no wind, the frost that came this morning is blessing from the ancestors. Your ceremony will be strong, your marriage long." "Tell her thank you," Rosalind said, "and that I'm honored." The old woman's eyes crinkled with amusement, and she responded in Apache before shuffling out. "What did she say?" Rosalind asked. Amahi's lips twitched. "She said you're too skinny now. All that work has melted the softness away, but at least you finally look strong enough to keep up with her grandson." She paused. "This is a compliment. She's very particular." The sun touched the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Amahi took Rosalind's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "It is time," she said. "Remember, speak from your heart, not your head. The words matter less than the truth behind them. Talico loves you. The tribe accepts you. You have already proven everything. Now you just make it official." She squeezed Rosalind's hand once more. "Come. Your future is waiting." They emerged into the golden light of sunset, and Rosalind felt her breath catch. The entire village had gathered in a great circle around the communal fire, which blazed high and bright against the gathering dusk. Someone had woven evergreen branches into an arch near the fire, and drums beat in that steady, hypnotic rhythm that seemed to pulse in her very bones. And there, standing beside the fire in ceremonial dress she'd never seen him wear, was Talako. He was magnificent. His shirt was white doeskin decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the firelight and threw it back in 100 tiny sparks. His hair was loose, falling past his shoulders, and he wore a headdress of eagle feathers that marked him as chief. But it was his face that held her, the way his eyes found hers across the circle, the way his expression softened from nervous anticipation into something that looked like wonder. Amahi led Rosalind toward the fire, and the crowd parted to let them through. Rosalind was aware of faces watching, of children peeking out from behind their mothers, of the 3 elder women taking their places as witnesses. But mostly she was aware of Talako's gaze, steady and warm, anchoring her through her nervousness. When they reached the fire, Amahi placed Rosalind's hand in Talako's. His palm was warm, calloused, steady, despite whatever nerves he might be feeling. He squeezed gently, and she felt herself settle. The eldest of the 3 women began to speak in Apache, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Amahi stood beside them, translating in a low voice so only Rosalind could hear. She says we gather at the turning of the year, when darkness is longest and light begins its return. We gather to witness the binding of 2 souls, 2 lives, 2 paths becoming one. She asks the spirits to bless this union, to make it strong as mountains, flexible as water, enduring as stone. The old woman continued speaking of tradition and community, of the responsibilities of marriage and the joys of partnership. She spoke of Talako's lineage, his achievements as chief, his worthiness as a husband. Then she turned to Rosalind, and her tone shifted. She says you come from far away, from a different people with different ways. She says you came here broken and have become whole. You came here soft and have become strong. You came here alone and have become one of us. Amahi's voice caught slightly. She says the spirit showed her a vision of a flower that was pulled from rocky soil and thrown into the desert where everyone expected it to die. But instead it took root in new soil, richer and deeper, and bloomed more beautifully than it ever could have in the rocks. She says you are that flower, and this valley is your true soil. Tears blurred Rosalind's vision. She blinked them back, trying to see clearly. The old woman gestured for Talako to speak. He took a breath, his eyes never leaving Rosalind's face, and began in Apache. After each phrase, Amahi translated softly. I am Talako, son of Nochalo, grandson of Delgadito, chief of this tribe. I take this woman, Rosalind, as my wife, not because her father gave her to me, that debt is paid and forgotten. I take her because she is brave, because she is strong, because she stood in this valley and chose to become one of us when she could have chosen safety. His voice deepened. I take her because when I look at her, I see Goshkan, the thing that survives where stronger things cannot. I see a partner, an equal, someone who will walk beside me through darkness and light. I take her because I love her and because she has proven herself worthy of love. The last words were spoken in English just for her, and Rosalind felt her heart crack open. Now it was her turn. She'd practiced the words in Apache for weeks, had Amahi drill her on pronunciation until every syllable was perfect. But standing there in the firelight with Talako's hand in hers and the entire tribe watching, her mind went blank with panic. She saw Amahi tense, ready to help, saw Talako's expression shift toward concern, saw the watching faces beginning to show doubt. Then she felt the small pouch in her pocket pressing against her hip, the 3 stones, the broken pot, the confrontation with her father, the journey from there to here. She'd already done the hard things. This was just words. Rosalind took a breath and spoke in Apache, her accent imperfect but her meaning clear. I am Rosalind, daughter of Cedric, born in England but reborn here. I take this man, Talako, as my husband. Not because I was given to him, but because I choose him. I choose this life. I choose these people. She faltered, searching for words, then continued in English because some things needed to be said in her heart language. 6 months ago, I was a burden, dead weight, something to be hidden and ashamed of. You took me in when my own father threw me away. You taught me to be strong. You taught me I was worth something. Her voice broke. You taught me I could bloom even in the desert. So I take you as my husband, Talako, because you saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when I was worthless. You loved me when I didn't love myself. And I will spend every day of our life together trying to become the woman you believed I could be." Silence fell across the circle. Then Talako smiled, that full, transforming smile that lit his whole face, and pulled her close. "You're already that woman," he whispered against her hair. "You've been her since the day you chose to stay." The eldest woman said something in Apache, and Amahi's translation was filled with satisfaction. She says the words are good, the intention's clear, the spirit's pleased. She declares you husband and wife before the tribe and the ancestors. What is joined here cannot be broken except by death or mutual release. You are one now, for all days remaining. The circle erupted in celebration. Drums beat faster, voices raised in song, and people surged forward to offer congratulations. Rosalind found herself embraced by women she barely knew, congratulated by warriors who'd watched her struggle through those first terrible weeks. Children ran between the adults, shrieking with excitement. The feast tables groaned with food, and someone thrust a cup of something potent and sweet into her hand. Through it all, Talako kept her close, his arm around her waist, his presence steady as the mountains around them. They moved through the crowd together, accepting gifts and good wishes, sampling food from every table, listening to stories and jokes and advice, both practical and absurd. Desba appeared with her arms full of winter flowers, small, hardy blooms that grew in the rocks and somehow survived the frost. "For you," she said, pressing them into Rosalind's arms, "because you're like them. You grow where nothing should grow. You bloom when everyone says you should be dead." "You're going to make me cry," Rosalind warned. "Good. Happy tears are good luck." Desba hugged her fiercely. "I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you're my sister now." Cochise came with his arm in a sling but his spirits high, offering the traditional gift of a hunting knife to Talako and a beautiful woven blanket to Rosalind. "For when the nights are cold," he said with a grin that suggested he wasn't just talking about weather. Amahi presented them with a clay pot, large and perfectly formed, decorated with symbols of protection and prosperity. "Try not to break this one," she said dryly to Rosalind. Then her expression softened. "You have done well, granddaughter. Better than I expected, if I'm being honest. Your English father was a fool to throw you away, but his loss is our gain. Welcome to the family, officially." Being called granddaughter by Amahi felt like the final seal of approval, and Rosalind found herself crying again despite her best efforts. The celebration continued long into the night. There was dancing around the fire, complicated steps that Rosalind fumbled through while Talako guided her with patient hands. There was singing, old songs in Apache that told stories of creation and heroes and love that endured beyond death. There was food until she thought she'd burst, and laughter until her face hurt from smiling. And through it all, she felt something settling into place inside her chest, a sense of rightness, of belonging, of finally being exactly where she was supposed to be. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, the crowd gradually thinned. Families took sleepy children home. The elders retired to their dwellings. The feast tables were cleared and the great fire was banked low, leaving just enough coals to mark the center of the circle. Talako took Rosalind's hand and led her away from the dying celebration, up the path to his dwelling. Their dwelling now. It was larger than Amahi's, with room for living and working, and someone had filled it with small touches in preparation for her arrival. Fresh blankets, clay pots for water and cooking, a space clearly left for her belongings. It wasn't grand by any standard, but it was theirs. "Are you happy?" Talako asked quietly, pulling her close as they stood in the doorway looking out at the valley below. "I didn't know I could be this happy," Rosalind admitted. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought my father was sending me to die and I was resigned to it. I'd given up on ever being anything more than what he said I was. And now? Now I know he was wrong about everything. I'm not a burden. I'm not worthless. I'm not a disgrace." She turned to face him. "I'm Goshkan. I'm a healer, a wife, a member of this tribe. I'm strong enough to carry water and brave enough to stand against soldiers and loved enough to be chosen freely instead of taken by obligation." She reached up to touch his face.
My father thought he was punishing me, but he gave me the greatest gift of my life, the chance to become who I was always meant to be. Talako kissed her then, slow and deep, and they retreated into their dwelling as the valley settled into winter's deep silence around them. The years that followed were not easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. Winter brought hunger when game grew scarce, and Rosalind learned to stretch supplies and make much from little. Spring brought sickness that swept through the valley, and she worked alongside Amahi treating fevers and coughs, learning through desperate practice what healing arts could achieve and where they fell short. Summer brought tensions with neighboring tribes over water rights, and Talako spent weeks negotiating peace while Rosalind helped the village prepare for the possibility of conflict. But through it all, their partnership held strong. Rosalind's body changed, shaped by years of hard work, into something powerful, thick with muscle, strong enough to haul water for hours or grind corn until sundown. Her hands grew permanently calloused, marked by the work that sustained their community. Her skin bronzed dark, and her hair, when she forgot to braid it, showed streaks of copper from the relentless sun. She was no longer soft English lady. She was Apache wife, healer, teacher. Children ran to her when they were hurt, bringing scraped knees and bruised egos for her to treat. Women sought her advice on herbs and remedies. Men asked her to translate when traders came through speaking English. She became woven into the fabric of the tribe so completely that eventually people forgot she'd ever been anything else. Talako's hair began to show silver at his temples as he navigated the increasingly complicated world of the 1880s. More white settlers arrived, pushing into lands that had belonged to Apache peoples for generations. The army built new forts, established new treaties, created new restrictions. Through it all, Talako worked to keep his people safe, negotiating when he could, fighting when he had to, always seeking the path that would preserve their way of life for one more season, one more year. And Rosalind stood beside him, bridging the gap between Apache and white worlds in ways that surprised everyone. When officials came from the territorial capital demanding surveys and boundaries, she translated not just words but intentions, helping both sides understand what the other truly meant. When missionaries arrived trying to convert the tribe, she explained gently but firmly that they had their own spiritual traditions and needed no saving. When journalists came seeking stories of noble savages and rescued white women, she corrected their assumptions with facts and asked them to write the truth instead of sensational lies. One such journalist arrived in the spring of their 5th year together. Miss Eleanor Briggs was a serious woman from Boston, one of the few female reporters working for a major newspaper, and she'd traveled all the way to the Arizona Territory to write about the English woman who chose the Apache chief. Rosalind received her in their dwelling, serving tea made from local herbs and trying not to smile at the reporter's obvious discomfort sitting cross-legged on the floor. "Lady Fairburn," Miss Briggs began. "Just Rosalind, please, or Siana, if you prefer my Apache name." "Siana." Miss Briggs tested the word. "What does it mean?" "The sky that holds the light." Rosalind glanced toward the smoke hole, where afternoon sun poured through in a golden shaft. "It was given to me during my binding ceremony. It means I bring light to my people, or hold light for them, or—" She smiled. "Honestly, Apache names are more poetry than translation. It means I belong here." Miss Briggs wrote rapidly in her notebook. "Tell me, how did you come to be here? The stories I've heard are contradictory. Some say you were captured in a raid. Others say you were rescued from starvation. One particularly lurid account claimed you were won in a card game. The truth is simpler and more complicated than any of those stories." Rosalind poured more tea. "My father traded me to Chief Talako to settle a land dispute. He called me a disgrace and an embarrassment, and he was glad to be rid of me. The chief could have refused, could have asked for horses or weapons or anything else. Instead, he took me. And then he did something my father never had. He gave me a choice about staying. And you chose to stay." "Not immediately. At first I was too terrified to think clearly. But as I learned their ways, as I saw how they lived and what they valued, I realized something. Among my own people, I was judged by my appearance, my size, my ability to be decorative and quiet. Here, I was judged by what I could do, what I could learn, how hard I was willing to work. She met Miss Briggs' eyes directly. Here, I had worth, real worth. So yes, I chose to stay. And when my father came months later with soldiers to take me back, I chose to stay again, publicly, definitively. Miss Briggs' pen had stopped moving. Your father came for you? He came with guns and demands, and the assumption that I couldn't possibly want this life. He was wrong. Rosalind's voice hardened slightly. He drew a weapon on my husband during peace negotiations. An Apache warrior took the bullet meant for Talico.
The army arrested my father and sent him back to England. I haven't seen or heard from him since, and I don't want to.
That's quite different from the story I was told, that you were being held captive and your father died trying to rescue you. Stories are often more convenient than truth. Rosalind stood, gesturing toward the doorway. Come, let me show you the village. Let me introduce you to the women I work with, the children I teach, the life I've built here. Then you can write whatever story you choose, but at least it will be based on what you've seen, not what you've imagined. Miss Briggs spent 3 days in the valley, and Rosalind watched her preconceptions crack and reform. The reporter expected primitive savages and found organized community. She expected crude shelters and found engineering adapted perfectly to climate and available materials. She expected degradation and found dignity, poverty, and found wealth of a different kind, captivity, and found freedom. On her last evening, Miss Briggs sat with Rosalind by the fire and asked the question she'd clearly been holding back. Do you ever regret it? Choosing this life over the one you were born to? Rosalind looked around the dwelling, at the clay pot she'd made herself, at the herbs drying from the rafters, at Talico sitting nearby repairing a bow, at Desba and 2 other children practicing English in the corner. She thought about her body, strong and capable, her hands marked by work that mattered, her place in a community that needed her and valued her contributions. Miss Briggs, she said slowly, I was born to a life where my only purpose was to be ornamental and quiet, where my body was an embarrassment and my opinions were unwelcome, where I was tolerated at best and despised at worst. She paused. My father thought he was punishing me by sending me here. He thought he was casting me into exile, condemning me to live among savages, destroying any chance I had at happiness. But he was wrong. Completely wrong. He didn't exile me. He freed me. He didn't destroy my chances at happiness. He handed me the only real chance I'd ever had. Rosalind smiled. So, no, Miss Briggs, I don't regret it. Not for a single moment. I regret the years I wasted believing what my father told me about my worth. But I don't regret anything that's happened since the day I walked away from Fort Yuma into the desert with a man I'd been taught to fear. The article Miss Briggs published caused a minor sensation back east. It wasn't the romantic tragedy readers expected. No noble lady suffering nobly among savages. No tale of captivity and rescue. Instead, it was the story of a woman who'd been thrown away by her own people and found value among those she'd been taught to despise. It was honest and unsentimental, and it quietly challenged every assumption white America held about Apache people and the women who lived among them. Rosalind received letters after the article published, some supportive, some horrified, many asking if she needed rescue. She answered none of them. That life, those people, those concerns, they belonged to someone she used to be. The woman she'd become had no need for their validation or their judgment. 20 years after that sunset ceremony in the valley, Rosalind, though everyone called her Siana now, sat on the cliff overlooking the village with Talico beside her. They'd claimed this spot as theirs over the years, coming here whenever they needed to talk or just be quiet together. Below them, the village had changed and grown. New dwellings had been built as children grew and married. A schoolhouse stood near the center, where Siana taught both Apache and English to a new generation that would need to navigate both worlds. A small trading post operated on the valley's edge, carefully managed to allow commerce without inviting exploitation. The stream still ran clear and the fields still produced corn and squash and beans, but now there were also chickens scratching in yards and a few cattle grazing the upper meadows. Change had come, but on their terms.
Teleco's careful negotiations had secured rights to the valley and the surrounding lands. Not as much as they'd once held, but enough to survive, to maintain their way of life, to remain Apache while adapting to an encroaching world. "Do you remember the first day I brought you here?" Teleco asked, his arm around her shoulders. His hair was silver now, his face lined with years of worry and laughter, but his eyes were still the same. Calm, assessing, seeing straight through to the truth of things. "I remember thinking I was going to die," Sienna admitted. "I remember my feet bleeding and my body screaming and absolute certainty that I wouldn't survive another day. And yet here you are, 20 years later, gray in your hair and wisdom in your eyes." Gray in my hair and aches in my joints, you mean?" But she was smiling. 20 years, sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like I've been here forever. "Any regrets?" It was the same question Miss Briggs had asked all those years ago, and the answer was still the same. "Not one. Well, maybe I regret not learning to ride better. Desba still teases me about it." "Desba teases everyone. It's her gift." Teleco's expression turned more serious. "Truly, though, you gave up everything to be here. Your language, your people, your father's fortune, such as it was. You could have gone back at any time. That first year, that first decade, even now, you could leave. Go back to England, claim whatever inheritance might be waiting, live comfortably instead of working until your hands bleed." Sienna looked down at those hands, scarred, calloused, marked by 2 decades of hard work. They'd ground corn and hauled water and prepared medicine and delivered babies and performed 1,000 other tasks that kept the village running. They weren't pretty hands anymore, but they were capable hands. Useful hands. Hands that built instead of just ornamented. "My father's fortune would have gone to some distant cousin by now," she said. "And even if it hadn't, what would I do with it? Buy a house I didn't want in a city that doesn't know me? Hire servants to do work I'm perfectly capable of doing myself? Wear corsets and make polite conversation with people who think I'm either tragic or insane?" She shook her head. "That's not wealth, Teleco. That's poverty dressed up in fancy clothes." "Then what is wealth?" Sienna gestured at the valley below. "That is wealth. Knowing every person down there by name. Having children run to you when they're hurt because they trust you to heal them. Teaching a whole generation to read and write and understand both worlds they'll have to navigate. Sitting here with you, still choosing each other after 20 years, still wanting to talk at the end of each day." She turned to face him fully. "My father thought he was sending me to poverty and exile. He couldn't imagine that work and purpose and belonging could be more valuable than money and status. But I know the truth now. I was poor in England, living in his house with his money. I'm rich here, with dirt under my fingernails and work that matters." Teleco pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the valley in shades of gold. Below them, someone was singing, teaching children the old songs so they wouldn't be forgotten. Smoke rose from cook fires where women prepared the evening meal. Men returned from hunting, their voices carrying up the valley walls. It was ordinary and precious, this daily rhythm of life continuing. "I should go down," Sienna said eventually. "Young Nina is due to give birth any day now, and I want to check on her before dark." "In a moment?" Teleco held her a little tighter. "I want to say something first." She settled back against him, waiting. 20 years ago, I took you from that fort thinking I was rescuing you from your father's cruelty," he said quietly. "I thought I was giving you a chance to be valued, to find purpose, to become strong. I thought I was offering you something better than what you had. You did. You gave me all of that." "No." Teleco shook his head. "You gave that to yourself. I opened a door, but you chose to walk through it. You did the work, survived the failing, pushed through the fear. Everything you are now, everything you've become, that's your doing, Sienna, not mine. I just had the wisdom to see your potential and the patience to let you find it yourself." Tears stung her eyes. Even after 20 years, he could still surprise her with his insight. "We made each other better," she said. "You showed me I was strong. I showed you that strength comes in forms you didn't expect. We're partners, Teleco. Equal, just like you promised that first day." "Equal," he agreed, "and free, and exactly where we're supposed to be." They stayed on the cliff until the sun touched the horizon and the valley below began to glow with firelight. Then they descended together, hand in hand, back to the life they'd built from exile and hope and stubborn refusal to be what others expected. Sienna checked on young Nina, confirmed that the baby would probably arrive within the week, and prepared herbs for the birth. She stopped by several other dwellings, treating minor ailments and catching up on gossip. She shared the evening meal with Amahi, who at 93 was still sharp-tongued and sharp-eyed, still demanding perfection from everyone around her. "You're getting slow," Amahi said, watching Sienna prepare tea. "When I was your age, I could do that twice as fast." "When you were my age, you were 30 years younger than I am now," Sienna pointed out. "Don't be logical. It's rude to old people." But Amahi was smiling. "Are you happy, granddaughter?" It was a question the old woman asked periodically, as if checking to make sure Sienna's choice still held firm. "Yes, grandmother, I'm happy." "Good. Because if you weren't, I would feel very bad about letting you marry my grandson." Amahi sipped her tea. "Though not bad enough to take it back. You're stuck with us now. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." "Good," Amahi said again, with finality. "Now tell me about Nina's baby. Is the position correct? Will we need special herbs?" They talked medicine and births and the complicated politics of the village until the fire burned low. Then Sienna returned to her own dwelling, where Taliko was already asleep, one arm thrown across the empty space where she belonged. She settled in beside him, feeling his arm curl around her automatically, even in sleep, and stared up at the smoke hole where stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns. 20 years since she'd walked away from Fort Yuma, thinking her life was over. 20 years since she'd stood in this valley, expecting to die and found instead a reason to live. 20 years of work and growth and becoming someone she never imagined she could be. Her father had called her a bloated disgrace and thrown her away like garbage. He'd meant it as the ultimate punishment: exile to a savage land, condemnation to a primitive life, destruction of any chance at respectability or happiness. But lying there in the dark with her husband's arm around her and her village sleeping peacefully outside and 20 years of purpose and belonging wrapped around her like armor, Sienna knew the truth. Her father had tried to punish her and ended up setting her free, had tried to destroy her and ended up delivering her to the only place where she could truly bloom, had tried to make her nothing and ended up giving her everything. She was Goshgan, the thing that looked weak but survived where stronger things could not. She was the desert flower blooming after fire. She was the reed that bent in floods but never broke. She was Apache. She was healer. She was wife and teacher and valued member of a community that needed her. She was exactly who she was meant to be, living exactly the life she was meant to live, in exactly the place where she belonged. And if somewhere in England her father still lived, still told stories about the daughter he'd lost to savages, still believed he'd punished her by sending her away, well, let him believe it. His opinion had stopped mattering 20 years ago when she'd chosen truth over his lies, purpose over his judgment, love over his contempt. Outside, a coyote called to the rising moon, and Sienna smiled at the familiar sound. The coyotes had been singing the night she'd decided to stay, and they were singing still. Some things changed and some things endured, and the trick was knowing which was which. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new triumphs, new work and new purpose. Tomorrow would bring a life worth living, filled with people worth loving, in a place worth protecting. Tomorrow would bring exactly what she'd found 20 years ago when her father's punishment became her salvation. Tomorrow would bring home.